Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're diving deep into Warren Treadgold's A History of the Byzantine State and Society. It's an ambitious project trying to fit over 1,000 years of history into just one volume.
It is quite a feat to pull that off. And Treadgold really doesn't just give us like a dry timeline of emperors and battles. He really gets into the complexities of Byzantine society and how their political systems evolved and the constant pressures they face both from inside and outside the empire.
So before we jump into all the details, can you give us a quick overview of the major themes that Treadgold explores in the book? What are the big ideas that tie this whole story together?
Absolutely. One of the central themes is this challenge of keeping such a vast and diverse empire running for centuries. The Byzantines were always dealing with these external threats, from enemies like the Persians and Arabs and later the Turks, but also all these internal pressures, like religious disputes and political instability. Treadgold really shows how they adapted their military strategies and their administrative systems, and even their religious policies to try to deal with all these challenges.
So adaptability is a key theme. What else stands out?
Another really crucial theme is the role of the Byzantine state itself in shaping society. Treadgold highlights this complex interplay between the imperial court and the bureaucracy and the church. And he shows how the state influenced everything from religion and culture to law and the economy.
That makes sense. We tend to think of empires as these top-down structures. But it sounds like the Byzantines had this more dynamic relationship between the rulers and the people they ruled.
Exactly. And another theme that runs throughout the book is this evolution of Byzantine society itself. Treadgold traces how the empire's identity changed over time, from its Roman roots to the emergence of this distinct Byzantine culture, shaped by Greek language and Orthodox Christianity.
Sounds like there's a lot to unpack here. So
Yeah.
let's start at the beginning. Where does Treadgold kick off this epic tale?
He starts with the reign of Diocletian in the late 3rd century. This is a time of real crisis for the Roman Empire. It was really on the verge of collapse. They were facing economic turmoil and military defeats, just widespread instability.
So this is even before the official split between the Western and Eastern Roman empires.
Yeah, Diocletian was still ruling over a unified Roman Empire, but he really recognized that they needed some drastic change. He put in place a bunch of reforms that had a lasting impact on what would become the Byzantine world.
Okay, so what were some of these reforms? What did Diocletian actually do to try and save the empire?
So one of the most significant moves he made was establishing the tetrarchy. This system basically divided the empire into 4 administrative units. Each one was ruled by a co-emperor. It was an attempt to decentralize power and make governing more effective.
It's not a pretty radical solution. Did it actually work?
It was more of a temporary fix. It did help stabilize things in the short term, but it ultimately collapsed after Diocletian retired. But this idea of dividing the empire into these more manageable chunks, that had a real lasting impact on the Byzantines later on.
Interesting. What else did Diocletian do?
Well, he also made some major changes to the economy and the administration, introduced a new tax system and reformed the currency. He even tried to get control of inflation. These were all measures designed to kind of revitalize the empire's finances and address some of the root causes of this instability they were experiencing.
So he wasn't just a political innovator. He was trying to tackle some serious economic problems, too.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme of adaptability here already.
Absolutely. Diocletian's reforms really highlight how the Byzantine state could innovate when faced with these crises. He realized that the old ways weren't working, and he wasn't afraid to experiment with new solutions. And this pragmatism would really become a defining feature of Byzantine rule.
It sounds like Diocletian really set the stage for a lot of the things that would eventually shape the Byzantine Empire. But I can't help but think of another major figure when we talk about the early Byzantines, Constantine.
Of course, Constantine the Great, the first Christian Roman emperor. He was absolutely pivotal in this transition from the Roman Empire to the Byzantine Empire.
His conversion to Christianity was a total game changer, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Constantine's embrace of Christianity had huge implications for the empire. He gave Christians legal protections and started integrating the church into the Roman state. He also convened the Council of Nicaea in 325, which helped to establish Christian orthodoxy and solidify the church's role in shaping imperial ideology.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Treadgold talks about how Constantine's decision to create this new capital city, Constantinople, that was like a symbolic break from the Roman past.
Yeah, the founding of Constantinople in 330 marked a huge eastward shift. Now, Rome was still technically the capital for a while, but Constantinople quickly became the center of power and the heart of the emerging Byzantine world.
It's amazing to think how this one decision to move the capital city could have such a huge impact on history.
It really shows how geography and symbolism play a huge role in shaping empires. Constantinople's location was strategic, right at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It gave them economic and military advantages, and its status as the new Rome helped legitimize Byzantine rule and created this sense of continuity with the Roman past.
So we've got Diocletian's reforms laying the groundwork for a more centralized and efficient empire, and then Constantine embracing Christianity and founding Constantinople, shifting the focus eastward. What happens next in this whirlwind tour of early Byzantine history?
Well, the next few decades are really marked by a series of challenges and transformations. As the empire tries to grapple with the legacy of all these changes, we see emperors like Constantius II and Julian trying to consolidate power and deal with religious controversies, and they're facing these renewed threats from barbarian groups along their borders.
Sounds like things were rarely calm in the Byzantine world.
You're telling me. It was basically constant upheaval. But even in the midst of all this chaos, the Byzantine state keeps adapting and evolving. One key figure in this period is Theodosius III. He became emperor in 379.
What makes Theodosius stand out?
He's often considered the last emperor to rule over a unified Roman Empire. When he died in 395, the empire was permanently split between his two sons. Honorius ruled in the west and Arcadius ruled in the east. This division is really a crucial turning point in history because it set the stage for the Byzantine Empire to emerge as its own distinct entity.
So Theodosius unintentionally helped create the Byzantine Empire. That's kind of ironic.
History is full of ironies. But what's important to remember is that this division wasn't just some sudden break. It was the culmination of a long process of the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire growing apart. The East already had its own distinct identity, with Greek language and Orthodox Christianity and all these unique cultural traditions.
Okay, so the stage is set for the Byzantine Empire. We've seen Diocletian trying to stabilize a crumbling Roman Empire, then Constantine's pivotal embrace of Christianity and the founding of Constantinople, and finally Theodosius I presiding over this permanent division of the empire. It feels like we're on the verge of a new era. But before we move on, is there a passage from this early period that really captures the essence of what was happening, a quote that stuck with you?
Yeah, there's this line from Treadgold that I think perfectly encapsulates the spirit of this era of transformation. He writes, "The Roman Empire did not die in the 5th century. It transformed itself and lived on for another 1,000 years." And I think that highlights how the Byzantine Empire wasn't just a continuation of Rome. It was something new, a dynamic and evolving civilization that would really make its own mark on history.
That's a great quote. It reminds us that even in the midst of decline and upheaval, there's always potential for renewal and transformation.
Exactly. And the story of the Byzantine Empire is a testament to that enduring human capacity for resilience and reinvention. But of course, their story is far from over.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface of this 1,000-year saga. We'll have to continue our deep dive into Warren Treadgold's A History of the Byzantine State and Society in Part 2. So join us next time as we explore the challenges and triumphs of the Byzantine Empire in its early centuries.
Picking up where we left off, that 5th century is really a key moment for the Eastern Roman or early Byzantine Empire. Now they're on their own, no longer sharing power with the West. And this is where those themes we talked about really come into focus. The challenges they faced, how they adapted, and how their society evolved.
It feels like a turning point for them, facing those challenges head on and forging their own path. What were some of the biggest things they had to deal with right away?
Just imagine being in their position. You have this legacy of Rome you're trying to live up to, but you're also trying to create something new. They were dealing with constant pressure on their borders from groups like the Huns and the Vandals, and internally they had to figure out how to govern this vast and multicultural empire.
That's a lot for a new empire to handle. Did they stick to those traditional Roman methods, or did they start to try new things?
It's really interesting to see how they mixed the old and the new. They definitely borrowed from Roman administrative and military structures, but they also showed this amazing ability to adapt. One example is this thing called the theme system.
Right, you mentioned that before. Can you remind me what those themes were? It sounds like a key part of their strategy.
So basically, they reorganized their military into these regional units called themes. Each theme had its own army and administration. It allowed them to respond more quickly and effectively to threats on different frontiers, whether it was in the Balkans or North Africa or in the East.
So it's like they decentralized their defenses to be more flexible. Did that move away from the Roman model cause any problems internally? Were there people who wanted to keep things the way they were?
Oh, there were definitely power struggles and tensions, as you can imagine. Change is never easy, especially in an empire with so much history, but this adaptation really helped them hold their own against all those outside pressures.
So they're facing down threats and changing up their military, and all this while trying to establish themselves as something different from Rome. What was happening with their culture and society during this time? How was the Byzantine identity changing?
This is where Christianity becomes even more important. Constantine had embraced it, but it really becomes central to Byzantine society under emperors like Theodosius II and Justinian I. And you can't talk about Justinian without mentioning his most famous achievement, the Hagia Sophia.
Ah, the Hagia Sophia. That incredible building with the huge dome that's still standing today. It's one of the most iconic symbols of Istanbul.
Exactly. And it's more than just a beautiful building. It represents Justinian's ambition, his vision for a Christian empire. It's this fusion of Roman grandeur with Byzantine artistry. Treadgold argues that the Hagia Sophia really captures the spirit of that era, reaching back to the past while creating something new and magnificent.
It's a powerful symbol. But Justinian wasn't just a builder, was he? It's also famous for his legal reforms.
Right, his codification of Roman law into what we call the Justinian Code was huge. It had a lasting impact on legal systems, not just in Byzantium, but throughout Europe and beyond. It's a perfect example of how the Byzantines preserved and built on those Roman traditions.
So it seems like Justinian wanted to leave his mark on every aspect of Byzantine life. Religion, law, architecture. It's quite a legacy. But was everything smooth sailing during his reign?
Oh, not at all. Justinian's reign had its fair share of challenges. There was this major revolt called the Nika riots that almost overthrew him, and he was constantly at war trying to regain lost Roman territories in the west, which really drained the empire's resources. And then there was the plague that swept through the empire in the 540s.
Wow, a plague on top of everything else. That must have been terrible.
It was a real crisis. Treadgold really describes the social and economic devastation of that plague in detail. It reminds us that even the most powerful empires are vulnerable to these forces they can't control.
It sounds like even during this golden age of Justinian, there was still a lot of struggle. Is that a constant theme in Byzantine history?
You could definitely say that. Challenges and adaptations seem to go hand in hand throughout their story. They were always having to adjust their strategies both within the empire and on the world stage. They had to deal with this really complex and always changing world.
And how did this constant struggle to survive affect their society? Did it shape the way they saw the world?
Absolutely. The Byzantines developed this amazing resilience. They really believed in their ability to overcome anything. They also became more focused on their Eastern identity. They were distancing themselves more and more from the Western Roman Empire, which had now fallen.
So by the end of the 6th century, you've got this Byzantine Empire that survived internal conflicts and external threats, and even a plague. They've strengthened their religious identity, reformed their laws, and established themselves as a real power. Where does Treadgold take us next?
Well, as we move into the 7th century, a new challenge comes on the scene that would really reshape the Byzantine world, the rise of Islam.
Ah, yes. Those Islamic conquests in the 7th century were a huge turning point for lots of civilizations, including Byzantium. What impact did this new force have on the empire?
It was profound. Within just a few decades, the Byzantines lost huge chunks of territory to the rapidly expanding Arab caliphates. They lost control of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa. These were massive blows to the empire, both economically and militarily.
It's hard to even imagine losing so much territory so quickly.
Yeah.
How did they cope with such a dramatic change in their fortunes?
It forced them to rethink their priorities and adapt yet again. They had to consolidate their remaining territories and develop new strategies to defend themselves against this new powerful enemy. And this is where we see that adaptability and resilience we talked about come into play once more.
It seems like this constant need to adapt must have had a huge impact on their society and their sense of themselves.
It definitely did. They went from this huge empire with dreams of reuniting the Roman world to a smaller, more focused power centered around Anatolia and the Balkans. And this period also sees the rise of a new kind of Byzantine identity, one that was more explicitly Greek Orthodox and even more distinct from its Roman past.
So the rise of Islam wasn't just a military challenge. It was a cultural and ideological challenge, too.
Exactly. It forced the Byzantines to define themselves against this new dynamic force. This is also when the iconoclastic controversy starts, which shows just how complicated the role of religion was in Byzantine society.
Right, the iconoclastic controversy. We touched on that before. Can you remind me what that was all about? It sounds like it caused quite a stir.
It was this period of intense religious and political turmoil that lasted for over a century. The controversy was all about the use of icons or religious images in worship. Emperor Leo III in the early 8th century banned the veneration of icons. He said it was idolatry. And that caused huge resistance, especially in the eastern provinces where icons were really important to people's faith.
It's amazing how something as symbolic as images could cause such a huge conflict. Was it really just about religious doctrine, or were there deeper political and social issues at play?
Treadgold argues that it was about way more than just doctrine. It was about the emperor's power, the role of the church, even the nature of what it meant to be Byzantine. The iconoclasts, those who opposed icons, drew on these older, more abstract theological traditions, while the iconoclast, those who defended icons, saw them as essential to their faith and their cultural heritage.
That sounds like a clash between different visions of what it meant to be Byzantine.
Precisely. And this debate went on for decades. Emperors flip-flopped between iconoclasm and iconualism. It was a really divisive time. And it wasn't until the mid-9th century that the use of icons was finally restored for good. But the controversy continued to affect Byzantine religious and political life for centuries.
This period of Byzantine history sounds incredibly turbulent. Losing territory, facing this new religious and political force, and then this huge internal conflict over icons. It makes you wonder, how do they survive it all?
I know it's a question that keeps coming back to me as I read Treadgold. Their resilience is amazing. And even in the face of all these challenges, they experience a resurgence in the 9th and 10th centuries. It's often called the Macedonian Renaissance.
Okay, now we're talking. I love a good Renaissance story. Tell me more about this period of Byzantine flourishing. What made it so special?
It was a time of renewed energy in culture and intellectual life. You see a revival of Byzantine art and architecture. Literature and scholarship flourish. And they even have some military successes as they push back against their enemies in the East.
So it's not just pretty mosaics and impressive buildings. There's real substance behind this Renaissance.
Oh, absolutely. There were big advances in law, philosophy, and science. Byzantine scholars rediscovered and preserved ancient Greek texts, which laid the foundation for later intellectual movements in the West. And politically, emperors like Basil I and his successors strengthened the administration and expanded their influence.
Sounds like a really exciting time for Byzantium. But I'm guessing this golden age doesn't last forever. What led to the decline of this Macedonian Renaissance?
You're right, nothing lasts forever. By the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was facing new challenges that would eventually lead to their downfall. One of the biggest was the rise of the Seljuk Turks.
Ah, the Seljuk Turks. They were a powerful force that swept across the Middle East. How did their rise impact the Byzantine world?
It was a major turning point. The Seljuks crushed the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. This battle is seen as a defining moment in Byzantine history because it opened up Anatolia, the heartland of the empire, to Turkish conquest.
It seems like we're getting to a crucial point in the Byzantine story. Losing their heartland must have been devastating.
It was a catastrophic loss, and even though they tried to recover, the Byzantines never really regained their former strength. The empire went into a long decline, marked by internal divisions, economic problems, and more territorial losses.
I'm starting to get a bad feeling about this. It sounds like we're witnessing the beginning of the end.
It is a tragic chapter in their story. But even in decline, the Byzantines showed remarkable resilience. They fought on for centuries. They even appealed to the West for help against the growing Turkish threat. But this interaction with the West, particularly the Crusades, had unintended consequences. It actually weakened the empire in the long run.
The Crusades, weren't they supposed to be helping the Byzantines fight the Turks?
Well, that was the idea. But the relationship between the Byzantines and the Crusaders was really complicated and full of tension. The Fourth Crusade was particularly bad. Western European Crusaders actually sacked Constantinople in 1204.
Wow, I didn't realize the Crusades had such a negative effect on Byzantium. So you've got internal strife and external pressures and even their supposed allies contributing to their decline. Where does this all lead?
Even though there were some periods of recovery, the sack of Constantinople in 1204 was a real turning point. The empire never fully bounced back, and it kept shrinking until it was finally conquered by the Ottoman Turks in 1453. The fall of Constantinople, this once mighty capital of the Byzantine world, marked the end of over 1,000 years of history.
It's amazing to think they were going through all this turmoil and still managed to influence so much of the world around them. As we wrap up our look at Treadgold's book, I'm curious about what you see as their most significant legacy. Where are those Byzantine fingerprints most obvious today?
Well, it's a big legacy that touches lots of cultures. One of the most direct impacts is on Eastern Europe and Russia. The Byzantines were really key in converting Slavic people to Orthodox Christianity. Their religious practices, their art and architecture all left a mark.
So they weren't just a political and military power, but also a cultural and religious one.
Exactly. And one really concrete example is the Cyrillic alphabet. Byzantine missionaries developed it, and it's still used in Russia and other Slavic countries today. It's amazing to think about the impact of that, a writing system shaping how millions of people communicate even centuries later.
It's mind-blowing to think about all the ripple effects of their actions. Beyond orthodoxy, where else can we see their influence? You talked about art and architecture earlier. How did their style influence the world?
Byzantine art and architecture are so distinctive. Even people who aren't into history can recognize them. Those incredible mosaics with the gold backgrounds, those iconic domes of churches like the Hagia Sophia, all the intricate iconography, it all points to this really sophisticated aesthetic. And it wasn't just confined to their own borders. Their style spread all over the Mediterranean and beyond. It influenced religious art and architecture in places like Italy and Russia and even Ethiopia.
It's like those visual elements became this universal language, transcending cultures and languages. I remember being blown away by the mosaics in Ravenna, Italy. They felt so connected to everything we've been talking about, even though they were far from the center of Byzantium.
It really is the power of visual language. And it wasn't just about aesthetics. Remember, they were also guardians of knowledge, especially those classical Greek and Roman texts. While Western Europe was going through this period of intellectual decline, Byzantine scholars were copying and studying and preserving these works.
So they acted as a bridge between the ancient world and the European Renaissance that came later.
Exactly. Without those Byzantine scholars, we might have lost so much of that ancient wisdom. And later, as they interacted with the Islamic world, there was this really productive exchange of knowledge, especially in areas like philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. Those ideas then flowed back into Western Europe and contributed to the intellectual changes that led to the Renaissance.
It seems like they were at the center of so many cultural and intellectual currents. It's hard to overstate their importance in shaping Western civilization.
People often overlook their influence, but Treadgold makes a strong case for how central they really were. And it's not just their direct contributions, it's also the way they govern their legal systems, their diplomacy. It all had ripple effects. Their legal code, for example, became a model for many later legal systems. It even influenced aspects of Islamic law.
So you've got cultural exchange, religious influence, artistic inspiration, and even the foundations of legal systems. Is there anything else we should add to this already impressive list of Byzantine legacies?
Well, thinking more broadly, their very survival for over 1,000 years is a lesson in itself. That ability to adapt, to constantly change and reinvent themselves when faced with challenges, it's something we can all learn from. They were masters of resilience. And that's a valuable quality no matter what time period you're in or what challenges you face.
That's a great point. Their story isn't just ancient history. It offers us inspiration and insights into how to deal with a complex and ever-changing world.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the key takeaways from Treadgold's book. He doesn't just give us facts and dates. He encourages us to really think about the Byzantine experience, to wrestle with its complexity, and to see how it's relevant to our own lives even today.
This has been an incredible journey exploring the Byzantine world with Treadgold as our guide. We've covered so much ground, from the empire's beginnings to its fall. We've delved into the challenges they overcame, the innovations they created, and the enduring legacy they left behind. I'm sure our listeners will have a whole new appreciation for this often forgotten civilization.
I hope so. The Byzantines deserve to be remembered, not just for their achievements and their grandeur, but for their resilience, their ability to adapt, and the lasting impact they had on human history.
And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Warren Treadgold's A History of the Byzantine State and Society. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Be sure to tune in to our next episode where we'll be exploring, well, that's a surprise for next time,